Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and welcome to this exciting session looking at all things Greater Manchester. And as Alex just said, it's all happening in the north, which I couldn't agree more with. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Daisy Chapman-Chamberlain, and I'm the Rail Services Lead at Rail North Partnership, which is the statutory body which oversees rail investment and innovation in the north of England. And today we're here to discuss how a mayoral combined authority and a train operator can work together on a shared vision and what we can learn from the fantastic work happening in Greater Manchester. So without further ado, I will hand over to my expert panel to introduce themselves. Nigel?
Hello everybody, I'm Nigel Stacey. I'm deputising today for Simon Elliott, who apologises, he can't be here today. I'm part of Simon's team and we're working on proposals for devolution and also on what we call B-Network rail integration. So I'm sure more of that will come up as we speak.
Oh, I think it's a guarantee. Alex?
Right, good afternoon, everyone. Alex Hornby, so I'm the Commercial and Customer Director at Northern Trains. So we're fully in government ownership, have been for the past 6 years now, and we're the second biggest train operator outside of London and the largest train operator in Greater Manchester. And as I was talking to Daisy and Nigel at the beginning, I think genuinely the North is a really exciting place to be. And I think there's some really exciting and interesting lessons as we go forward into GBR and the important balance between making sure that we provide a rail network whilst ensuring that we're aligned to the needs and wants of the mayors and their constituents. So I think it's a fascinating subject that I'm sure we'll learn more about together today.
Absolutely. I think everyone joining us clearly agrees it's a fascinating subject, hence why they're in the, I was going to say room tent with us. So please hold your questions for the end. There will be a Q&A portion, but for now we're going to jump straight into, I suppose, explaining the key challenges and opportunities as Northern prepares to join the B-Network. Alex?
Yeah, so I think I'm a glass half full person. I'd like to think particularly this is more about opportunities. It's around addressing the challenges as we go. I think the opportunity to create a fully integrated transport system that the B-Network has driven is really important. And it's pleasing to say, genuinely, as someone inside Northern, I think culturally we are deeply aligned. We don't feel like we're being dragged along, which I think as often is the case previously. The PTEs previously have often set an agenda and rail has tried to almost fit inside that. We are genuinely working together hand in hand across colleagues in the B-Network, the Mayor's Office, Northern and indeed other TOCs and Network Rail as to how do we deliver and how do we fit inside and fit a part of an integrated transport system. Why is that important? Because I think we have to think outside rail. We can't just see ourselves as a mode existing in isolation. I think what the B-Network has proven in terms of its power as a brand, the power of an integrated system is already happening and is working for people in Greater Manchester in terms of bus and Metrolink and cycling. And I think it's really important that rail needs to really find a way of fitting a part of that. That will build customer confidence. That will get people out of cars. That will help release the roads. That will help power economic growth and help promote the building of houses and general growth inside the area. We know from talking to our customers they want simplicity, they want affordable fares, and integration will unlock that. And I think the important thing as well is it's this opportunity of strategic alignment as well, that public transport in itself is the driver of economic development. And how we link all areas together in that sense and how we are making sure that we're part, transport, rail is part of the conversation around economic development is key. I think to cover some of the challenges, I think I sort of touched on that in my introduction really. So as Northern, we are a rail operator where we will be soon part of GBR. We're essentially part of what is a national rail network. So we need to be very careful. How do we balance the needs of Greater Manchester in providing a service and network that works for Greater Manchester, but how do we ensure that the wider network also functions well around that? And we need to really balance that quite carefully because the boundaries that exist in terms of the different mayoral combined authorities don't necessarily exist for our customers. And I think we get that. I think all parties get that. And I think as well, we also have to be very careful that what works for Greater Manchester might not necessarily be the answer everywhere else. So whilst we're proud of what's happened in Greater Manchester, I think we have to be very careful that we need to align ourselves with the individual aims and wishes of the mayors and their constituents in the other areas across the north as well. Because to those of you who are in the north, which I'm sure you know anyway, the north is just not one homogenous place. It's actually composed of very different places with very different needs and actually very different types of opportunities. So I think as long as we balance reaching those opportunities, being mindful of that challenge, which I believe we all are, I think there's a great opportunity, not just for rail in Greater Manchester, but how that functions in terms of rail across the north and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach for everyone, but I do think that, as you say, there are a lot of lessons that can hopefully be learned from this as we transition towards GBR. Nigel, then from the B network perspective, what are those challenges and opportunities?
I think, I mean, just picking up on what you said, Alex, I think the main issue is how do you get the wider transport network, and that's not just public transport, but how do you get the wider transport network to function as one integrated whole? And maybe for too long, and I'm 40 odd years in the rail industry, but maybe for too long, rail has been almost like a separate part of the transport network. It's been managed as a separate part, it's been politically led as a separate part. And I think what we really need to do is try and find new and imaginative ways, new innovative ways of getting transport planning to be done much more locally. And you'll all know that we are speaking with government a lot about how we can look to define a different role from ourselves within the context of GBR. That's a long pathway, and I don't think anybody thinks that we can resolve all of the issues that face customers, all of the issues that face place in terms of growth in the north. All of this is something that we're going to have to work out over a long period of time. We also know that money is something that's not sort of hanging on trees anymore, and it's going to be a big challenge for all of us to look to find out how do we find the right amount of funding locally to focus on local transport networks. How do we focus the right amount of funding on rail, and how do we then work with the train operator within GBR and GBR itself in terms of infrastructure? How do we work collectively to define the right place-based outcomes and get all of that worked into a solid 5-year plans that deliver a long-term vision, because that's really, really tough. The stuff that's simple to do is the hardest stuff to actually do in practice, and I think we all know that this is not going to be, a simple sort of easy thing to fix, but we are all committed. And I think as Alex has said, we've really made some sort of great initial steps in terms of working together locally. We're looking at PAYGO coming in the next sort of year or so. We've got a lot of work on branding. We're starting to do some work and some thinking around passenger disruption management and how we could be much more joined up together. So the benefits, I think, could be really substantial for customers if we can work out how to work much more smartly locally, and how we can work much more joined up locally amongst all the different modes. That's true. That's not just Manchester. I think that's true everywhere. And if you look at London, I think they've done some fabulous work there over the years. How do we sort of borrow that best practice from London and around the world, bring that into the north, but also get that much more local focus that you spoke about?
I think as well, you mentioned about innovation. Actually, a lot of the things that are happening are unnecessarily, and there is innovative stuff happening. I think the more exciting stuff that we see happening is the things that are really, they're doing things that GBR would do, but it's happening now. So the point is we're not waiting. And actually, culturally, the things that I see us now doing, because we're now in the same mindset as colleagues at the B network, are happening now. If there is disruption on the rail network, our colleagues will tell you, go and get on this bus service and tell you the route number. Now, rail never talked about buses in that way. I get very passionate about it because I've spent 20 years in the bus industry. And actually, I always found it very difficult to try and get rail and bus to really work together. So it's actually really nice being on the other side of the fence, almost forcing some of these issues, because I say the customer, particularly in Greater Manchester now, they will see a yellow bus that does things. They'll see that we're going to be a part of that. We've got to stop this divide between modes. In terms of simplicity, Nigel touched on pay-as-you-go. There's effectively a pay-as-you-go system on bus that will happen on rail. We will create. Very, very admiring of what happens in London. But I don't like us saying a London-style system. What we're creating in Manchester is a Manchester-style system for Manchester, for Greater Manchester. And there is a simpler FIRS system that was introduced in December. We've gone down from 40-odd FIRS to 2 FIRS. There's always these horror stories I remember people having about being greeted with a TVM in Greater Ticket Vendor Machine. Sorry, you can tell I'm a railway person. I'm using initials all the time now. Ticket Vendor Machine in Manchester Airport and greeted by 40 different FIRS. Now, there's 2 FIRS now. It's any time and off-peak. And these are the kind of things that, you know, it feels like a revelation, but actually as a customer, it's the obvious thing to do. And by having these type of almost reflective conversations and putting a mirror up in front of ourselves, these are the kind of things that are happening now. That will help feed a pay-as-you-go system. The first 2 lines will come on track in December in terms of being able to tap and go, and then we ramp forward into what will be across the network and then across the wider system. And this is stuff it's happening now, and I would say from a northern perspective, we're not waiting for GBR happening. We're helping to inform what the GBR in the future looks like by coming up with a first structure that suits.
Can I pick up on that? Because I think that's absolutely vital. You know, I'll stick my neck out slightly. The last few years has created a bit of a vacuum in the rail industry. What Manchester and Northern have done is started to fill that vacuum. I think the real challenge for us becomes with the establishment of GBR. The establishment of GBR, for all of you guys who work in the rail industry, is going to consume a huge amount of bandwidth in terms of time, personally, professionally. How do we manage to keep that? You asked about the challenges. I think one of them is going to be, how do we keep this ability to innovate and this ability to work at pace, which is what we're doing, keep that alive in a world where everything's changing around us all. And I think that's really critical, and everybody should bear that in mind. That, you know, so again, 40-odd years working in the rail industry, I've been through so many reorganisations, I don't even know who I am anymore. But the one thing that's true is that the people in the rail industry who really love the industry and want to make the industry better, I think, you know, if you can find ways of working out with what's happening and keep a focus on colleagues, local colleagues, support each other and build ideas and keep that going, I think that's worth its weight in gold for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure everyone in the room would completely echo the point of being in a real time of flux, a real time of maybe not quite understanding what the direction of the future is. And there are a lot of questions around that shift to GBR, which I think leads us quite nicely on to, I suppose, that as a wider topic. So we are saying we are moving towards that in future. What lessons can this particular partnership in Greater Manchester help to teach GBR as it is formed and as it moves into the future, obviously, as the behemoth of an organisation that it's going to be?
Well, I think what we're illustrating here is the need for GBR to work with local partners. I think that's really important. I think while GBR will be a national brand, it may be one of the biggest national brands that there will be, it may be one of the biggest brands that exist in the world at some point. But at the same time, I think what we're doing here is we're showing the importance of working with local partners, because transport is a local good. It's delivered locally. It's usually used locally, particularly if you look at our network in terms of the Northern network and the local network in Greater Manchester. So I think the first thing, I think it's right to do what we're doing. It's right to not wait for GBR to be formed. It's right not to wait for rules to be written if there are being rules to be written. We're getting on and doing stuff now that is right for the customer. It's right for the Mayor's ambitions. It's right for the ambitions of Greater Manchester. So I think we can be sure that there's decisions being made locally that are within the framework, you could argue, of what GBR will be. I think the need for having a clear vision is important. There's a very clear vision in Greater Manchester. I think that we'll begin to see a clear vision come for GBR. I think aligning them is really important. And I think that is critical. And that is something that's happened here. We've made sure that the Northern vision is aligned with TFGM's vision in terms of we've got our own growth strategy, 30 million journeys we want to deliver by 2030, creating customer confidence, which is 7 different work streams, which is all around how do we make sure customers feel happier to use us, and 90 and 2, which is all around how do we make sure at least 90% of our trains are delivered to their destination on time and less than 2% are cancelled. And all of these things, when you then have these conversations that we're having locally, they match. When you have them nationally, they match. And I think it's really important that the idea of a vision, when we all like get down to it, rather the things that we disagree on and rather the things we want to point fingers on, actually when we talk about the things that we want to agree on, you'll find that we probably agree on them. And actually that's really important as to how we move forward. I think funding, Nigel touched on it as well. I think that's important. That's important to get that right at the beginning. And I think we have broadly got that right in terms of how that's being delivered in Greater Manchester, both in terms of the pay-as-you-go system, how we do branding, how we improve stations, how we improve accessibility. All that has been set out, and that's something that we're working really well on it. And I think to sort of probably sum up in terms of the lessons for GBR and also the idea of doing it now, we've put customer ahead of structure. We haven't waited for structure. We've said, actually, what is right for the customer here? And this is what that we are set out on delivering. As ever, things take longer than you want it to. You want to deliver them now. But I think actually what we're showing is actually the idea that you're taking two, sort of behemoths of organisations, if you say, in terms of Transport for Greater Manchester and Northern and the wider rail industry working together. I actually think in terms of time and we're not doing too bad. We'd all like to be quicker, but I think that is something that we are showing that by having that aim that this is being delivered for the customer, we're all sort of racing to that as the target.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think this sort of summarises what you were saying, and I'm going to borrow a phrase from a very senior government minister, and that is that in the new world, it's going to require a lot of maturity on everybody's parts.
Yep.
And it's going to require a lot of understanding of the separation of accountability and responsibility on everybody's part and how we implement that. And I don't think it's any secret that GM has been proposing for some time that we would like a greater commissioning role in terms of specifying the outputs. How that will work in practice, there's a lot of work still to be done. Richard Crabtree from GBR TT is here, and many others we've worked with. Nobody can say at this moment exactly what the future relationship between a Mayoral authority and GBR will look like. But I think it's very clear that it's right that elected politicians define what the place-based outcomes they want to achieve are, and it's right that elected politicians decide on what the funding envelope is, and that's true nationally, and that's true locally as well. How you then interface that with a rail industry or any industry is vitally important. But it's also, and I'd echo something one of the previous speakers said on the last talk, that it's absolutely vital that once you've decided on what those place-based outcomes are and what their funding is, you allow the rail industry to get on and do it. The rail industry, the experts, yeah? Mm-hmm. But separating out where that allocation of accountability comes, and I think to me, in my mind, it's much more about the Mayoral authorities being very clear about the place-based outcomes. I've done a lot of work sort of over the years, sometimes in Canada, and the way they would specify in terms of saying, these are the number of people we want you to lift and shift. Mm-hmm. We don't ask you to specify a timetable. Yeah. You lift and shift these people peak and off-peak, go and work out a solution for that. We may say, these are the types of outcomes we want for stations in terms of sustainability. You go and design a station portfolio that does that. We know you can't do that over time. We may say in terms of things like passenger disruption management, sort of these are the outcomes we want. How do we work much more closely together to actually deliver those? In GM, we have access to many more modes than GBR is ever going to have in terms of moving people when there's disruption locally. Mm-hmm. How can we work out a relationship between the two of us that's very mature? We both know what we're accountable for and what enables us to deliver locally for passengers. So I think, echo everything you said, but I think there's a framework we can build around that as well.
And I think as well, in terms of GBR, I think we all have to look at it as genuine opportunity. GBR will bring track and train together. That will make life simpler for the customer. It means that we will spend less time as industry pointing fingers at each other. It means we'll be focused on solving the problem rather than deciding whose problem it is to sort out. And I think you've got that as a force happening with a force of a proper integrated transport system that a customer can easily navigate their way around, that is doing right things for the region it's in. This can't be anything more than an opportunity. Why would it not be? And I think actually GBR as almost a one-stop to work with for a Mayoral authority will make life much easier as well. Again, we're sort of doing it already now, in terms of we have something that is currently called the Quad, likely to be called something different soon, which is us, Transparent Express, and the two rail regions working together. We're setting up an appointed individual for each mayoral authorities. So the mayoral authorities think they're dealing with one person. And that's what the railway needs to be. That sense of accountability, ownership is happening. And that is representing, I think, truly how GBR can be that opportunity for mayoral authorities and customers to feel that they're better engaged with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've keep saying about the kind of the funding elements of this and the kind of funding priorities for the future. But we know that rail has obviously a huge amount of value beyond simply just the fare box and the takings from the fare box. So in terms of that broader value of rail, the connectivity benefits, the benefits to local communities, how do we ensure that this partnership can communicate the wider social value and the wider benefits of rail? Do you see there being a role for this partnership in really, I suppose, expanding how maybe we think of rail as beyond just moving people from A to B, but actually having foundational and formative impacts on the communities that it serves?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if we published our vision in Manchester last November, I think it was, and that's exactly what we were getting at there. That yeah, rail has huge social value, massive social value, and I think I'm all for making, and we'll come on to this perhaps a bit later, but I'm all for sort of trying to find ways of doing more for the same. You know, there is no magic money tree anymore. We've got to find ways of being far more efficient. But at the same time, public transport as a whole, and that includes road as well, but all of the different modes have a massive role to play in terms of delivering social value. The job that I think the local authorities, government authorities, both local and national, have to do, is do the heavy lifting for the rail industry in terms of working out where that social value is and what it is we want you to do for us to enable us to deliver those outcomes. And that's, I think, one of the key separations of accountability we need to work on. I mean, I'll go back to nuts and bolts. At the moment, we're very much working on how do we improve the local day-to-day passenger experience, because that's what we can do at the moment in this sort of vacuum while GBR is being set up. What we have to do is design into GBR collectively the mechanisms that allow GBR to have a very, very clear playing field to deliver that social value for it.
And I think it's a big subject, and I think yeah, we are delivering and will deliver more. You know, there are things from the community rail network, how that is delivered in Greater Manchester. You know, so there's the grassroots things that are happening where rail is intensely close to its community and is delivering, you know, stations as a destination, stations as nice places to be, all the way through the position of a rail station as an economic force, as an economic power in the location it's in, and a focal point of the station it's in. And these are the kind of conversations, anytime we're in a table with Vernon Everett or with the Mayor, these are things that are these are spoken about. And I say it is this idea of rail isn't working in isolation anymore. I think a lot, thankfully, I would say, due to the political dimension of rail, these conversations are actually much easier to have, and they open more doors about having conversations about rail because it is about it being a social force and an economic force. So, you know, and I will even draw out, because I like to do drop a few sort of things that are happening in reality. Culturally, it's in our mindset as well. Okay, we think commercially Eastern Rail, we're obviously in government ownership. But I'll give a great example of something we've done in terms of social value recently. We have education tickets for people, for customers to attend schools and colleges easier. We've set up a really easy ticket for them to use. We've then made sure that's valid on Transparent Express, so people see the railway as the railway, not individual operators. And a couple of weeks ago, we introduced a Settling In ticket, which is a free ticket for a child and parent to go out and travel on the railway for a day, just so they can get used to it, and so that brings them closer to rail. And what's that doing? It's making access to education easier by rail. A little initiative in some ways, but actually, I always like to have something that really proves that something is happening, and it's happening in the model now, and it can work in today's model, and it can work in tomorrow's model.
Yeah, and it may be a small initiative on paper, but the impact that it has on the people who actually benefit from those initiatives is anything but small, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
So because we are at Rail Live, and I know we'll have a lot of speakers in the room and suppliers in the room, I should say, what are the key challenges that we're facing in the region and that the partnership is of course facing as we move into the future? And specifically, how can the suppliers in the room help us to meet and address those challenges?
I think rail in the north, it's sort of derived from the funding problem. You know, we haven't seen the funding that the southeast has seen, but predominantly the issues that the passenger face are a lack of reliability. They are an industry that I think is just still too expensive. You know, we've got to find ways, the supply chain, we've got to find ways to innovate and get down the costs. You know, we have to find ways of making this rail industry something that really everybody can be proud of without it costing a fortune. Because it can be, you know, I think it's something we generally all could be very proud of. You know. But we see costs escalating. I'm not going to go into details because I think that would be wrong on this sort of platform, but we see costs escalating all the time, and that makes the delivery of improvements really, really challenging. So innovation in the supply chain to enable us to find smarter ways of delivering more for the same, I think is absolutely critical. I think, you know, that's to me is probably the biggest challenge we have. And then the second one is about how do we improve the reliability, finding new ways to improve reliability so that the passenger again sees a much more a journey that they can depend on and trust. And I think the third thing I'd say starts to speak towards the sort of the data piece, and that's that how do we really find ways of understanding what the place-based needs are and modelling the outputs we need and translating those into rail outputs. How do we do that? And I think if we can find ways of working with the industry to do that quickly, I think that to me is those are the major things.
That segues beautifully, as if and we haven't practiced this, by the way, but this is as if we have practiced it. Because where I was going to start was by saying, actually, let's again be customer-led. Let's start with the customer. Let's start with the problem statements rather than let's start with a solution of something we need to buy. Mm-hmm. So the questions that I would ask suppliers in the room is, what happens if a customer loses a bag at Manchester Victoria? How do we deliver that in an integrated transport system? Where should they go? How does the system work that means I can get it back to them? What if passenger assist requires transferring from a train to a bus? How do we have an effective system that delivers that? What if a customer wants to use pay-as-you-go on a multimodal journey? How are we going to address that? I think we're getting close to that. And what if a customer wants to understand how a delayed Metrolink tram will impact on a rail connection? So I think what I'm trying to be there, I'm probably trying to be, but you know, really go to these are the things that will happen at the point of delivery. So I'd rather have conversations around that of saying these are the problem statements, these are things that will destroy customers' confidence in the system. So what we want is solutions for that, so a customer feels confident. We know things will go wrong, people will lose a bag, a train will run late, etc., etc. But you make a customer feel much more happier and confident in the system if we deal with it in the right way. Another line I often quote, customer satisfaction at Northern, if everything runs to plan, we're sort of in the high 80%. If things don't go to the plan and we don't inform them, we don't look after them, that customer satisfaction levels drops to 30%. It drops by 50 percentage points. It's huge. However, if we inform the customer and we help them on the way and we give them the right advice, that satisfaction drops by 1% because the customer feels looked after. So there's lots in that space around customer confidence and devising solutions that we can put in a customer's hands, that we can use things that make systems talk to each other to deliver. And that will be my plea. I'm using some examples there of let's try and have the conversations more right about the problem statement of what happens in that moment when that customer is losing their confidence in the transport network and what can we do to address them. I think we touched it as well. How do we deliver value in a constrained financial environment? That's not me saying we want everything to be cheaper, although I don't mind if it is. But it's around doing things smarter, isn't it? So that means let's make sure we're having the conversations as early as we can. Let's make sure that our specifications are with you as early as we can. And there's something that ultimately what you can deliver to us is what we can deliver out to the customer. And then thirdly, the wider responsibilities. Daisy touched on social value. We need to make sure that what you deliver is reflecting the values that GBR and the rail ultimately needs to deliver as well, which I know so many suppliers are absolutely clued up on. But this increasingly, as we all know, this isn't a nice to have. It's how we now need to operate. It needs to be completely embedded. And then it's just then how do we then work together? Obviously, suppliers produce goods and services they want to sell. We want to operate them to their maximum capability. And I think that is taking joint ownership of that as going forward is really important too.
Can I just, fabulous Alex, thank you. I just had this thought, and this is probably going to be slightly contentious given the audience, but...
We love a contentious thought.
So everybody in here who is part of future GBR or is part of the supply chain, you are all the supply chain. And I think in the past it's often been seen as the rail industry has a supply chain that serves the rail industry. But the rail industry is actually part of a supply chain for something far more, which is the social value you talked about. And I think that's one of the big changes. The rail industry needs to see itself as part of the system, part of the country's wider infrastructure, its social infrastructure, and how does it enable the country to really change what it is from the inside. And I think it can lead by example. I think it's got a fabulous ethos. I think it's fabulous people who work in the industry. But somehow we have to change the relationship. It's almost like, and I'm not blaming you for this, Alex, but I think it's almost like somebody from the industry talking to the supply chain. I think the Secretary of State talking to GBR, and I think the mayoral authorities, if they have those powers, talking to GBR. We need GBR in terms of that maturity again and that accountability to see themselves as part of our supply chain to delivering the value in a social democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to ask as well from a very practical standpoint, I know that a lot of suppliers here, and particularly smaller suppliers and SMEs, do sometimes find it frustrating when they have a fantastic solution, they are meeting a challenge that exists in the industry, but that there maybe isn't always a clear path to where can they go with that solution, how do they approach, what should they be saying, who do they talk to? Do you have any advice for the suppliers in the room today about if what you've said, Alex, has really struck a chord with someone and they think they have a fantastic solution, where do they go to it and what do they say?
Without forming a queue, you can have my business card. I'm open, I'll talk to you. I want to find, me and lots of the people that work in the rail industry want solutions to serve our customers more effectively. We want to hear them. It's so important that we do because we don't have all the answers. Of course we don't, but nor should we. The innovations of how we serve customers more effectively often will come from customers, often we'll talk from talking to customers. So I think putting ourselves in the mindset, as Nigel says, of we're in the railway, we know best. I think that as a mindset is really shifted and changing now. It's around ultimately how do we deliver for a customer that we need to go and understand and get in their heads and get in their mindsets and deliver on that basis. So yes, at Northern already, it's in our mindset that we do our utmost to deliver, to work with SMEs locally in all sorts of formats and shapes and what have you. We're delivering 2 digital pay-as-you-go trials with 2 different suppliers because we want to understand the capability of different suppliers, and that's important. So I think that is, there are opportunities there that exist, and I think all I would encourage you is to engage with us directly. And we're not in the age of social media and LinkedIn. We're all not difficult people to find anymore, surely. So, unfortunately, for those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, you'll know I'm not difficult to find. So yeah.
I hope you brought plenty of business cards with you, Alex.
Yeah, I just put something very short, and I think this is the other side of the coin from what I was saying before, and that's that us on the government side of this, we need to give you as the industry the stability you need to be able to deliver as well. All too often over 40 odd years in the rail industry, I've seen the wind change direction too many times, and that lack of consistency is really, really hard for people to deliver for. I know that from working in the industry sort of as well. So yeah, one of the things we've got to do is do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of help giving you the stability so that you can plan and really deliver for us as well.
Absolutely. A partnership approach all round.
Absolutely.
So we are going to move into the Q&A portion. If you can please wait for a microphone to come to you. And when you have the microphone, please introduce yourself with your name and your company. And then ask your question of our amazing panel. So hands up, does anybody have a question? Just a gentleman in the front here.
Hello there. My name's Matt from RIQC. As devolution grows in places like Manchester, what mechanisms actually make this shared vision between combined authority and TOC stick? And how important is independent assurance in keeping that alignment credible over time?
Well, that's a good question. What are the mechanisms? I think a very clear funding route and a very clear specification, however we choose to do that. That could be through the DFT, that could be more direct with GBR. That's all to be worked out. I don't think anybody knows that, but whatever that, the clarity in terms of what outcomes we want to see, overfunding period which aligns to a long-term vision so it doesn't chop and change. I think it's absolutely critical. I think that's part of that. I'm sorry, and the second part of your question was?
How important is the independent assurance in keeping that alignment over time? So external assurance.
I'm not an expert on this, but the regulator still has a role in terms of overseeing. I don't think they have the same role that they had in the past, but the regulator still has a role in terms of having a look at sort of how we would deliver. But part of nationalisation, the ethos of nationalisation is that essentially you remove some of the need for that independent assurance. You're basically saying we give our elected politicians the right, and if we don't like what they do, we get rid of them every 4 or 5 years or whatever that is. So I think I don't think you need independent assurance in the same way as we had in the past. Although I do think the new passenger watchdog in the bill and the way that's being set up, I think is great. I think that's a really good step forward, and I think that having that independence, I think is all good stuff. So.
I think it's creating a track record, isn't it, and delivering on it. I think that's the important bit, and the customer will be the judge of that, whether that's growth in customer numbers, growth in customer satisfaction, but actually the satisfaction of the voter at large and ultimately the elected officials at large. The real turning point I've been here for sort of 18 months of what has been, a longer journey than that in Greater Manchester. But the turning point that I noticed, there were 2 key turning points. The first one was when we decided as an industry we were going to embrace what the Mayor wants in terms of simple fares and pay-as-you-go. And that was a leading programme in the first ticket and retail reform programme that's happening nationally. And we were all discussing multi-agency, how do we deliver, who's going to deliver this message? Because there were going to be some trade-offs. When you're creating a simpler fare system, as we know, there's going to be some trade-offs. But actually, what we found was a message that said, on average, 5.6% of fares will be lower. And at that point, Andy Burnham took the message off us, and he didn't let us have the message anymore. But that was the real turning point. It actually said, we've delivered something as an industry that the Mayor and the authority is so happy with that he doesn't even want the rail industry to deliver it. He wants to take that off and deliver it himself. Now, you can't get a better endorsement than that. And then the second bit, I would say, was a turning point, was when we wrapped a train in saying, B network, coming soon on rail, turn up and go, coming soon. And again, that was almost then the physical embodiment of, oh, we are all in this together. Rail, so you could sell. What Andy Burnham and his team were saying is, oh, rail is listening to us, rail is taking this seriously. And us saying, yeah, actually, we see the value of this, and working together is the right thing. And I think the more we deliver those, I don't mean those as individual, but they are individual moments that say, actually, we're in this together, and we're demonstrating it in physical and literal forms for the customer to experience. And the more we carry on doing that, the more that will be our judge, because that's what will push satisfaction up. That's what will make regulators happy, that they can see that we're moving forward and doing the right things for customers. That's all what make Transport focuses, and all the external bodies that look in on us and judge us, they will be the judge, whilst we're delivering on the ambition of what elected officials want locally. So I think deliver. You can't do anything better than just delivering.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Just at the back here, please.
Alois from Network Rail. Quick question on this. Would it be useful for the Mayor office or someone outside the rail industry, as we speak, to invest in upgrades on the rail industry, like electrification or introduction of digital signaling like ATCS or CBTC? Because we've seen how much Crossrail and Thameslink have improved the reliability and frequency of the railways in London. Would it be useful to have the Mayor office invest on upgrades in the rail industry within the Greater Manchester area to improve passenger satisfaction?
You've mentioned a couple of very, very big ticket items. We invest all the time. We are investing at the moment. All the B network stuff is £104 million, I think, in total. We've been invested in access for all upgrades for years. We are looking to build a new station at Goulburn. So we are doing stuff all the time. National government's pockets are deeper than local government's pockets, and how you sort of work out sort of you're going to fund, because if we electrified in the Manchester area, then it would have a national impact as well. It would have benefits more widely. So that will be something, and it has to be part of the National Rail strategy. I think part of the devolution debate is how do you potentially allow local authorities to sort of look to invest more widely in not just in transport. So I think there's stuff to be done there. But that's a very, very big question. I think it's highly unlikely you'd find a local authority in the UK could actually stump up the cash for electrifying its own railway. And apart from anything else, we could take the GM boundary and just electrifying the GM boundary. Well, that wouldn't do any good as soon as you get sort of a mile outside of it. So there are whole system sort of type issues that we would need to address. But yeah, we do invest all the time, and we would look to invest more sort of. I think we would argue that if we got devolution and we had more rights to sort of define the outcomes and potentially hold GBR to account a little bit more, then potentially we would look to invest more, because that gives us some more security in terms of what we get out of it. At the moment, it's more, we can just add incremental investment to the existing, and that's what we do. But we will continue to do that, and we will continue to look for imaginative ways to do that too.
And I think just all I'd add is not least the Mayor of Greater Manchester, but also the Mayors North of England. They're really powerful voices. The investment that we will hopefully see in the North of England, that we're seeing now. We saw the recent announcement by the Chancellor, where she came to our depot in Leeds, surrounded by the Mayors of North of England, saying this investment is going to happen in the North of England. So I think this is and again, this is the idea as well, embracing that political opportunity of these strong voices in the room. Things like that will be stronger and like to think easier in the North, because it has that political weight that is happening. And for us as an industry, that's for us and our customers to hopefully take advantage of and benefit from. But yeah, do not underestimate it. There was a reason why announcements like that happen right in the centre of the North of England, surrounded by the mayors. That is hopefully a clear message as to their collective strength.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Just over here.
Yeah, Mark Sullivan. I used to be on a Transport Users Consultative Committee years ago. There are sort of two stages, Mr. Stacey, which I think you're addressing. What hasn't been mentioned is the first issue is not to integrate the railway into the B network until you know that it's going to be reliable. And I think you're doing two routes, but others are not. The timetables are generally perfectly good in themselves, but you need to really work on getting it reliable before you can do it. And that will take you run for you for 10 years. It will buy you time for you and your successors to address a bigger question, which is when will Manchester in the end have to look at a subsurface tunnel under the city?
Sure.
Now, unfortunately, the mayor's got an obsession with putting a mainline station underground, which Stuttgart Stows is not a good idea. And London has actually got a lot of the suburban services out of stations, King's Cross, St Pancras, Liverpool Street and Paddington. Now, that will take 10 or 15 years. So I think the key thing is to get the B network onto the rail in the way you described, but you do need to be sure it's reliable first. I think that's your current aim, isn't it?
Absolutely, 100%. I think the answer I gave in terms of the supplier question was that, and mostly GBR, I think what we can do to deliver greater reliability is critical. I would say something about the timetable. Yeah, the timetable broadly works in and around Manchester, but it's still broadly the same timetable that's existed for 30 or 40 years, and it does not necessarily meet the place-based needs of where we want to move people to and from in a modern economy. And as that economy changes over the next 15, 20 years, then the same is going to be true. Now, getting on to so yes, absolutely, we need a highly performing railway first and foremost. If you haven't got that, there's no point trying to create sort of, whether it's HS2 or NPR or anything else, if you just sort of feed people into something that doesn't perform, it's just not good. When you come to start talking about tunnels under Manchester, I'm not that sort of operational expert. but I simplify it really and just say we have a Manchester core problem. So the Manchester core is completely over capacity in terms of trains that you can push through it, and then you have to solve that core problem. We published the vision last year where, yes, you're absolutely right, in the vision we spoke about a new sort of Piccadilly station sort of underground and sort of joining up that way. You know, I don't think anybody's going to say that's the definitive solution. The modelling that we would need to agree the long-term place-based solution and the network that's right and solving that core problem, and that will need some form of underground railway. Yes, all that has to be done, and that's exactly what I talk about when I'm saying, you know, a shift in terms of accountabilities and responsibilities between GBR and us, and where do we take over the role of starting to specify in the long term what the real rail vision is. How do we identify the funding for that and give GBR the certainty that that's what we want in the long term? Now you go away and find a way of delivering that for us in the best possible way.
I think 3 quick points to pick up there. And I agree, you don't want to sell something that isn't delivered optimally. I totally get that. I think the one thing that we are proving at Northern is progress is happening. So cancellations dropped by 2 percentage points over the past year. So we are now within the target we've created. Obviously, we want that to be 0%, of course we do. But the point is, what that's delivering is it is making customers more confident to use us. 10% more customers we saw year on year. That has given them confidence to actually go and stand next to our train and support us. So that proves that we're on that right journey, and it's a journey of progress that people are getting more confident in, not least our stakeholders and our customers. The timetable, I agree, Nigel's right. You know, our 30 by 30 plan is all around what do we do to make sure we are delivering a timetable that's relevant to the needs of the customers it serves. I think for too long we probably have edited a timetable as opposed to actually stuck back and trying to design and produce a new one. That will be easier if we can sit together with the combined authority and almost design it together and sort of say, what are your needs? Let's work around those needs. I always quote the way, often in the railway there's a Monday to Saturday timetable, and actually a Saturday is very different to Monday to Friday. Hell, we know now Monday to Friday is quite different to a Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. But that's a balance, and how do we make sure that life is still simple for the customer there. But there's definitely that need, and I think on the wider point and the more long-term point is we'll deliver a better service if the North's creaking infrastructure is dealt with. The North needs investment in infrastructure, it needs investment in newer trains, bigger trains, to allow us to run more frequently and provide more capacity. That needs more infrastructure, and that's where you do get to really start solving the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I have no doubt we could talk on this topic for hours, but unfortunately that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for a deeply informative panel. Can we have a round of applause for the speakers, please?
Very good.
Thank you.